have you thought that someone or something was going to be the one in your life and then it turned out not to be the one? You ever thought that? I remember my first car. The first car that I bought was a 1956 Morris Minor. 2-door, sky blue. I loved that car. When I got that car, it was already over 30 years old. It had been fully round the clock on the little odometer. It had been round the clock once. Bench seats, front and back. No seat belts in the back of the car, no air conditioning, no heating, nothing like that. This car still had a crank handle. Anyone know what a crank handle was? It was a handle that you could plug into the front of the car and turn and manually start the car, like crank the car over with a handle. This was the first car. And I want to tell you, I absolutely loved my sky blue Morris Minor. And I was convinced, I remember telling my dad that this was going to be my forever car. This was it. And I told him I had plans. I was going to have the thing resprayed and recoated. I was going to have the bumpers re-chromed because they're all like chrome bumpers. I was going to have the seats redone and reupholstered, and this was going to be my car forever. It turns out the Morris Minor was not my car forever. So I wonder, have you ever had anything in your life, something or someone that you thought was going to be, this is it, this is the one, and it turned out not to be the one? Maybe for you, like me, it was a car. Maybe you kind of got this dream car and you thought, this is the car. It wasn't the car. Maybe it's a house. Some people, they move into a place, that they buy a house, or sometimes they build a house and they think, this is it, this is my house, this is the dream home, I'm going to stay there forever. And often when that happens, we don't stay there forever, do we? Maybe it's a job for you. I know people who've just had their heart and their mind set on a job or a career, and I'm going to do this. If I can get a job in this place, that'll be it. I'll get there and I'll stay there forever. And usually it's not a forever, is it? Maybe it was a person. Maybe you had that boyfriend or girlfriend, anyone like that? You dated someone, you thought this was going to be my forever. They weren't. It's so easy to believe in a moment that something or someone is going to be the one. When you're in that moment, it's easy to think they're going to be the one, and more often than not, they turn out not to be the one. We're beginning a brand new series today, a 6-week series that is going to focus us on the journey up to Easter, 6 weeks between now and Easter. And I'm really excited about this 6 weeks. But I also want to tell you, this 6 weeks is not my idea, right? Not my idea at all. This is a series inspired by the one. The one. 50 million album sales, 150 million singles. You know where we're going? Over 100 billion, with a B, over 100 billion Spotify downloads, 14 Grammy Awards, 4 times Album of the Year, the only person to ever win 4 Grammys for Album of the Year. And I'm talking about Taylor Swift. Her Eras tour came to Australia last year. It's the biggest music concert tour in history. By a long, long way, 149 shows over 5 continents over almost 2 years. It was seen in person, her show, by over 10 million people. Ticket sales of over 2.1 billion with a B dollars, 2.1 billion dollars in ticket sales. It's called the Eras Tour, if you don't know. I've learned a lot about this. If you don't know, it was called the Eras Tour because the concert, when you went to the show, was broken up into what she called the eras of her life, which were the albums that she'd done. So the show was literally sort of broken up into sections, with each section focused on one of her albums. Each section, each era had a different staging. She completely changed costume for each era. And if you talk to fans, anyone who was there, they've all got their favourite era. Which era, which album. Bree's laughing because she has one. I'm not going to get you started. So anyway, we started to think about Easter, and Our incredible creative team, we don't have incredible creative team, but a couple of the young adult girls in the church lobbied me hard and said, hey, you know what? We should look at the different eras of Jesus' life, right? We should look at the different aspects, the different things that make up Jesus. Just like, Taylor Swift said, here are the eras of my life. Here are my albums. Here are the things that have created me, and every one of them has sort of a different vibe and a different theme and have helped me make me. We should look at Jesus like that. Because after all, Taylor Swift is pretty good, but she didn't split history, right? We don't refer to time as like BT and AT. Not yet anyway. 10 million people saw the Eras tour. I did some research this week. Best guess, and this is totally a guess, but best guess is that every week 700 million people gather globally to celebrate Jesus. Right? Every weekend, 700 million people in a building, in a gathering somewhere to celebrate Jesus. That's every week. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Jesus the Eras Tour. Right? And I want to tell you, someone has spent way too long doing this, right? Way too long.
It's going on a t-shirt.
Yeah. There will be t-shirts available, all right? Come back. We're selling merch. And I want to tell you honestly, the hardest thing about this idea is deciding what parts, what aspects, what sort of eras of Jesus to include. Because some of you might know this, but Jesus only lived 33 years. Taylor Swift's actually already 34, by the way. Jesus only lived 33 years. His, what people call his public ministry, like all of the teaching and the stories and the miracles and all of that, happened in only about 3 years of Jesus' life. Taylor's been recording albums for 18 years and counting. But even in just those tiny 3 years, there's so much, isn't there, about who Jesus was, what Jesus did, what Jesus said. And so honestly, the hardest part about this 6 weeks has been working out what, in all of what makes up Jesus, what do we want to focus on in this 6 weeks? But it's not hard to know where to start. It's not hard to know where to start because all the gospel writers, so I'm talking about Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, the guys who wrote the biographies of Jesus' life, all of them start in the same place. All of them start saying the same thing about Jesus. They all start by saying, Jesus is the Messiah. Now, there's no cheering at this point. There's no randomly high-fiving people next to you, and I get that. I get that because Jesus is Messiah is not what you expected me to say, right? Because it's not the first thing that we necessarily think about Jesus. But it is absolutely the first thing that the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, thought about Jesus, and the first thing that they would want us to know about Jesus. So let me explain how they come to that and how we don't necessarily as easy come to that. And I'll start where we really often start in this church. We start at the beginning. The story of God and his people begins in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 with a perfect world. It's a world at peace. There is no violence. There is no death. There is no hate. People live in harmony with one another, perfect harmony with one another. They live in harmony with God. They live in harmony with nature and the world around them. And all that changes in Genesis chapter 3. A serpent enters the scene and he tricks people into rebelling against God. You don't have to listen to God's plans and rules for you. You can do your own thing. Did you know that if you want, you can be your own boss? make your own rules. Sound familiar, right? The serpent still whispers into the world today, right? The serpent whispers these lies into the first people, into the lives of Adam and Eve, and they believe the lies of the serpent and they rebel against God. And they're successful in the sense that they do get to do their own thing, they do get to be their own boss, they do get to make their own rules, and it's a total disaster. People become selfish and greedy, and words and ideas and feelings and emotions like anger and hate and violence and ultimately death enter the world. And people end up living in conflict with one another, in conflict with nature and the world around them, and even in conflict with God. And it's a sad picture that we see repeated again and again and again for the rest of the story of the Bible. It's a sad picture that we actually see repeated again and again in the world today, don't we? You turn on the news, you scroll social media, and we see that picture repeated again and again and again. But hidden in that original story is a tiny little detail that is super important to what will come next. Because when that original rebellion, when the Adam and Eve rebellion in Genesis chapter 3, when that whole thing blows up, God enters the picture and he talks to Adam and Eve and he talks to the serpent. And one of the things that he said to the serpent, if you read the story, it sounds almost like a little detail, but it's really important. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, God says to the serpent, he says, I will put enmity, which is an old word that means like hostility or aggro. I will put aggro between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He, talking about someone in the woman's offspring, like someone in her future family tree, right? He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. God says that somewhere in the future, someone will come from the woman's offspring. Someone will appear from this woman's family tree who will crush the head of the serpent. And over the next 2,000 or so years, God will repeat that promise again and again and again. God will speak through other people. The Bible often calls these people prophets, people who speak God's word to the world. And they will say again, and they will repeat this promise, this belief that there's someone coming. They will repeat this again and again and again. And while the world spirals deeper and deeper and deeper into mess and chaos and violence and hate and hurt, people keep waiting for this special chosen person to appear and to make everything right again. And the ancient Hebrews called this person Messiah. It's an ancient Hebrew word that sort of means the anointed king. The Greeks translated the word Messiah into the word Christ. And this is the world that Jesus gets born into. Jesus is born into a world of people who are watching and waiting for God to send the Messiah. They're watching and waiting for God to send someone who will fix the mess that the world's in, for God to send someone who will restore the world to the way that it was supposed to be. And baby Jesus grows up into a guy who will stand up in front of the world around him and say, I'm that guy. And Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, the biography writers, they all want you to know that they believe that Jesus is that guy. Matthew opens his biography, literally Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 says this, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah. Mark Literally, chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. John takes the other approach. He doesn't put it in the beginning. The very last verses, the last two verses of John, this is John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. John writes, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples which are not written in this book. But these are written, in other words, I've written all this stuff down. These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Greek word for Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you may have life in his name. When Luke tells the story, he begins with the birth story, you know, the whole Mary, Joseph, baby Jesus thing. Luke begins with an angel appearing to Mary with this message. You will conceive, the angel says, you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you're to call him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. Luke doesn't say the word Messiah, but he will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. He will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. All those phrases hyperlink to promises about Messiah in the Old Testament. It's like, tell me you're the Messiah without telling me you're the Messiah, right? That's what Luke's doing here. Now, when we pick up the biographies of Jesus, and you read a story like the one where Jesus calms the storm, this is in Matthew chapter 8, verse 23. It goes something like this. Jesus gets into a boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. He replied, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up, he rebuked the winds and the waves, means he told them off, Oi, you, stop it. And it was completely calm. Listen to this. The men were amazed. What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Now, we read this story and we think it's a cool story about Jesus calming a storm, right? We think that'd be awesome. Like, I hope I can get a little bit of that at my next outdoor family birthday party, right? That'd be cool, wouldn't it? Just have the thing outdoors. If the weather's no good, I got it covered, right? But that's not the point of the story, is it? The point of the story is the response of the disciples, saying, what kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Because who can do that? Who can control the weather with the word? Who can do that? Messiah can do that. That's what this story is all about. Mark tells a story about a day that some guys dragged their paralysed friend on a mat. He's lying on a mat and his mates are dragging him, and they drag him before Jesus to see if Jesus can do something to help their mate because he can't walk. Mark chapter 2, verse 5. When Jesus saw their faith, that's the faith of the guys who are carrying the mat, because it takes a fair bit of faith to drag someone who can't walk. You know what I mean? Think this could work. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralysed man, Son, your sins are forgiven. Now, some of the teachers of the law were sitting there and they're thinking to themselves, why does this fellow talk like that? Who can forgive sins but God alone? And immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this is what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to the paralysed man, your sins are forgiven? Or to say, get up your mat and walk? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. So he said to the man, I tell you, get up, pick up your mat and go home. The man got up, onto his feet, took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. And this amazed everyone. And they praised God, saying, "We've never seen anything like this." Now, when I was a kid, I read that and thought, that's a cool healing story, right? That is not a story about healing, right? That is a story about forgiving sin. Well, at the end, when it says we've never seen anything like that, they're not talking about the healing. They've seen plenty of people get healed. They've never seen anyone forgive sin. When they say we've never seen anything like that, we've never seen a person who can forgive sin, because only God can forgive sin, right? Only the Messiah can forgive sin. Matthew and Mark and Luke and John want you to see what they saw. That Jesus kept doing things and saying things that pointed to himself as the Messiah, the one that people have been waiting thousands and thousands of years to show up. But this creates all a little bit of a kind of an awkward problem for you and me, doesn't it? It's an awkward problem because most of us, honestly, don't care. And I mean, like, we don't care because we're not Jewish. Right? You don't know all of these Old Testament promises. You don't have these promises pinned up on the back of your toilet door going, "I hope this happens in my lifetime." You're not waiting around for the Messiah. In fact, the truth is, most of you, even if you come to church, you barely know what the Messiah is, right? So when Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John open their stories and say, "I want to tell you a story about Jesus the Messiah," no one cares. There's no high fives. No one's excited, no one's cheering, because we don't get how significant this is. But here's the thing. We all know what it feels like to look at a messed up world and think, "I wish this was different." We all know how it feels to look at the world and think, "This place is bad and it seems to be getting worse. Man, I wish there was someone who would do something about this." Lots of us know actually what it is to look at our own lives and think about our own lives. This thing's pretty messed up and I'm not sure it's on a path to getting a whole lot better. I wish there was a way to fix this, don't we? You know what I'm talking about. Like, we live in a world where I can click a button on my phone and someone will bring a Coke to my door, right? And yet 785 million people live in the world without fresh drinking water. Right? That's messed up. I have an app on my phone that I can click and it will play meditation for me and keep me calm and happy. Right? The United Nations tell me that last year over 500,000 people got murdered. Do you know the context? Do you know where most of those people get murdered? Who they get murdered by? By their family, right? Did you know that? More murder happens within families than anywhere else. Right? That's messed up. It's a world that's messed up. Last Monday, public holiday, I went with a couple of friends. We go to this cafe. It's a nice cafe. We have lunch. It's a really good day, Instagram worthy. Well, other than the fact that I never look Instagram, I'm never dressed Instagram worthy, but put that aside, the food was Instagram worthy, right? We drive home, sitting at the lights, guy pulls up on a scooter next to us, goes absolutely berserk, full road rage on the car behind us. Right, guy on a scooter, middle age, couple of young girls, P-platers. I think what happened is they went to change lanes and didn't check their blind spot because they're P-platers and they don't do that. And I've got one, she never checks her blind spot either.
I do.
And I think what happened is they went to change lanes, didn't see the dude in the scooter and whatever. But he pulls up next to me, a middle-aged guy, wind down their window, and he just, every word you can imagine, just like went full aggro, threatening them, get out the car. Like, that's messed up, right? We've all seen, like, you've got your own stories. We live in a world that is messed up. You listen to the news, you scroll social, it's messed up. Hate and depression, anxiety, violence, slavery, poverty. This stuff is all around us, and there doesn't seem to be any cure. There doesn't seem to be any way. This stuff doesn't seem to be getting any better. And I want to tell you that if you've ever felt like that, if you've ever had any of that sense about the world around you or about your own life, you are waiting for Messiah. If you've ever felt any of that sense of, I wish there was a way for this thing to get better. I wish there was someone who could fix this thing in my life. I wish there was someone who could fix this thing at work or at school or in the world around us. You are waiting for Messiah. And the first thing Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, the guys who were there, and others, want you to know, they didn't write this, but it's like saying the first era, you know, the first aspect, the first thing about Jesus that they want you to know is that the answer to all this mess is a person called Messiah, and that Jesus is that person. Where there is hate, Jesus brings love. Where there's depression, Jesus brings joy. Where there's anxiety, Jesus brings peace. Where there's violence, Jesus brings healing. Where there's slavery, Jesus promises freedom. Where there's poverty, Jesus promises abundance. Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John would look at your life and they would want to say to you, whatever it is that's troubling you, whatever it is that's stressing you, whatever it is that is kind of weighing heavy on you, Jesus is Messiah and Jesus is the way out. But spoiler alert, Jesus might not be the Messiah that you're expecting. Because 2,000 years ago, Jesus wasn't the Messiah that everyone back then was expecting. The Roman Empire had conquered the world. And all of God's people, all of Jesus' countrymen, they were like people in the Ukraine now with kind of Russia squashing on top of them, right? And so they thought the Messiah was going to come all buff and riding on a horse with a big sword, and he was going to take on the Romans and wipe everyone out. That's what they thought Messiah was, right? That's not what Jesus was. Jesus came as a servant, as a humble guy, talking about love and forgiveness and peace. And some of you know this. If you've read any of the Bible, you know some of this story, is that there were lots of people who were convinced that Jesus actually wasn't the Messiah exactly because he didn't fit the picture of what the Messiah should look like, right? They're like, this guy says he's the Messiah, but he can't be the Messiah because he's not got the sword and the white horse, right? And they missed it. They actually missed it. And 2,000 years later, it can be easy for us to make the same mistake and miss it all over again. Because it's easy for us to think that if Jesus is Messiah, then the perfect job and the beautiful house and the awesome holidays are got to be coming my way. It's easy for us to think that if Jesus is Messiah, then happy families and healthy kids are coming my way. It's easy for us to think that if Jesus is Messiah, then wealth and success and all of that stuff are going to be coming my way. It's easy for us to think that if Jesus is Messiah, I'm going to live happy and healthy until I die in my sleep at 104 with my family all sitting around the bed smiling at me, right? I hate to burst your bubble, But that's not the promise of Messiah. And if that's the Messiah that you're waiting for, then you might miss it. Just the same way as 2,000 years ago, a whole stack of people, most people, missed it. But I want you to hear this morning. I want you to hear from the men and the women who were there and who saw it. Because their message to us, generation after generation after generation, is absolutely clear. They believe that Jesus is the one. Hope, joy, love, peace, meaning, purpose, forgiveness. Jesus is the one. So when someone says to you, do you believe in Jesus? I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It's not actually really a question about do you believe that a guy called Jesus existed once. Because I don't know if you know this, but actually anyone, Christian or non-Christian, anyone who studies this, everyone believes that Jesus actually existed. Did you know that? There's no argument about that. The fact that 2,000 years ago there was a guy called Jesus who lived in the Middle East, that is a tick for sure. The fact that that guy believed some things about God and that he walked around and that he talked about the things of God and that people followed him and there was a bit of a thing going on around him, that is a tick for sure. The fact that he was arrested and crucified by the Romans and died that way, that's a tick for sure. Everyone believes that, right? Even people, even historians and experts who are not Christian believe all of that. It's the bit that happens next that people argue about. Because some people say that that same Jesus rose from the dead. And in rising from the dead, he proved that he is Messiah. That's the decision that you have to make. That's what it means when someone says, do you believe in Jesus? What they're really asking, they might not know this, but what they're really asking is, are you one of the people that believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and do you think that he is Messiah? Or do you think that he stayed dead and in that case there's really no hope for the mess that the world finds itself in? Because for 2,000 years, really the fundamental message of Christianity is a group of people saying, we believe that Jesus rose from the dead and he is the Messiah. That's actually what it means to say, I believe in Jesus. So the next 6 weeks, we're going to take a deep dive into the person of Jesus. We're going to look at all different sorts of aspects, facets, eras of the life of Jesus. But the first era, the first question, the first part of Jesus is a question about Messiah. And I get it. It's a question that most people today are like, well, who cares? Does it matter? And what I'm hoping to leave you with today is that if you've ever looked at problems in your life and thought, I hope this could get better, I hope there's an answer to this, then you care. And if you've ever looked at problems in the world around us, stuff in the news, stuff on social, stuff in the lives of other people that you love, and you've looked at the mess there and thought, I wish this could get better, I wish there was an answer, then you care about Messiah. The story of Messiah is that there is hope. That there's a way out. I don't know, maybe it's like a way forward or a way over or a way through, but like there's a way, do you know what I mean? And this church exists to invite you to join a little community of people who are saying, we believe that Jesus is Messiah. We believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that he is the one the world's been waiting for, that he is Messiah. And so that's the journey we're going on over the next 6 weeks, okay?